Welcome to this explainer. Imagine, if you will, the absolute ticking clock tension of June 1815. The smoke has barely cleared from the battlefields of Waterloo, and man, it has brought with it a catastrophic, truly world-altering defeat. The absolute ruler of France, a guy whose very name made entire empires tremble, suddenly realizes his reign is just over. He's on the run, he's completely cornered, and the walls are rapidly closing in. So today, we're going to look at the fascinating mechanics of exactly how a continent-conquering emperor was finally brought to his knees. And spoiler alert, it wasn't by an army on land, but by an inescapable iron ring on the water.
So let's dive right into this. The British faced a literal strategic nightmare in the summer of 1815. How exactly do you trap the most dangerous man in Europe? Napoleon Bonaparte is a master tactician, a man who has famously slipped through the fingers of his enemies before. Well, the answer lies in an incredibly precise, utterly unforgiving maritime trap closing in on a cornered emperor. As you'll see, this isn't just a story about a battle. It's really about the suffocating geometry of naval supremacy.
All right, moving into Section 1, the Emperor's Final Flight. Right after abdicating the throne and fleeing to the coastal port city of Rochefort, Napoleon's goals underwent a massive, almost unbelievable pivot. I mean, think about it. Just weeks prior, he was maneuvering massive armies to conquer the European continent. Now, his massively downgraded master plan was simply to secure passage to the United States. He actually envisioned living out the rest of his days as this enlightened gentleman, studying science and quietly writing his memoirs. It's just a staggering psychological shift, going from emperor to aspiring American retiree.
And get this, he actually had a ride waiting for him. There were exactly 2 French frigates, the Sale and the Méduse, just sitting there in the harbor. They were fueled, provisioned, and waiting to take him safely right across the Atlantic to his new life. His golden ticket out of Europe was literally right there in front of him.
Which brings us to Section 2, the unbreakable naval blockade. So, you might be wondering, why didn't he just leave? Well, because standing between those 2 French frigates in the open ocean was a massive wooden problem. The British Royal Navy had completely perfected the incredibly difficult art of the naval blockade. The absolute vanguard of this blockade, guarding the crucial choke point known as the Basque Roads outside Rochefort, was the HMS Bellerophon. Now, this was a formidable veteran 74-gun ship of the line. Sure, she was an older ship, but she had a terrifying pedigree, having fought in the legendary battles of the Nile and Trafalgar. And at her helm was Captain Frederick Maitland, a man who was given strict, unambiguous orders: maintain the choke point, intercept any vessel trying to leave the harbor, and absolutely capture Bonaparte at all costs.
Now, what's really interesting here is the slightly absurd, truly desperate reality of Napoleon's situation. For days, he and his entourage just sat in port, agonizing over their options. They brainstormed trying to slip past the Bellerophon in a smaller, faster ship under the cover of darkness. When that seemed way too risky, they actually considered smuggling the former emperor, literally hidden inside a barrel, aboard a neutral Danish merchant vessel. I mean, it really shows you just how dire things were getting for him.
But Captain Maitland? He was entirely too smart for any of that. He expertly anticipated every single one of these desperate moves. He didn't just sit out there in the deep water, he actually deployed a whole network of small guard boats across every single shallow exit and maintained this relentlessly tight patrol pattern. The maritime blockade was mathematically and physically impenetrable. The sea routes were completely, utterly sealed off.
Okay, let's look at Section 3, the calculated surrender.
The walls were shrinking incredibly fast at this point. With the ocean firmly locked down by the Royal Navy, Prussian and Royalist French forces were rapidly closing in by land. If he stayed, he faced a near certainty of execution for treason by the newly restored French king. So, trapped between the devil and the deep blue sea, on July 14th, Napoleon makes a wildly bold gamble. Totally out of options, he drafts a letter to the Prince Regent of Britain, formally throwing himself upon the mercy of the British people. And he actually compares himself to the ancient Greek leader Themistocles. It was a brilliant, highly theatrical PR move, perfectly designed to appeal to British honor.
So, the crucial point we have to talk about is this monumental climax the very next morning, July 15th. Napoleon actually boards a small brig called the Epervier and sails directly out to meet the HMS Bellerophon under a flag of truce.
He steps aboard the British warship, is greeted not in handcuffs, but with the formal honors due to a general, removes his hat, and delivers this legendary verbal surrender to Captain Maitland. "I am come to throw myself on the protection of your prince and your laws." The most dangerous man in the world had literally just turned himself in.
Moving right along to Section 4, a surreal maritime voyage. You now have the ultimate enemy of the British state, practically living aboard a British warship sailing toward England, and what follows is an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation and pure charisma. Napoleon launches a relentless charm offensive. The sailors of the Royal Navy, men who had spent their entire lives and careers fighting against the man they literally called the Corsican Ogre, found themselves completely captivated by him. He walked the decks, asked highly detailed, really intelligent questions about the ship's rigging, formally inspected the British Marines, and treated every single member of the crew with immense respect. He won them over completely.
Which brings us to a fascinating question. If the hardened sailors of the Royal Navy were charmed, how in the world did the British public react when the Bellerophon finally arrived at the port of Plymouth and word inevitably leaked out that the Emperor was aboard? I mean, you'd probably expect anger, riots, or people demanding his execution, right? Well, the reality was this deeply ironic spectacle. The arrival sparked absolute maritime pandemonium. Instead of demanding his head on a pike, thousands of everyday British citizens climbed into small rowboats and completely surrounded the Bellerophon. They were treating him like a maritime celebrity. They honestly just wanted to catch a glimpse of the living legend they had been reading about in the papers for over a decade.
And finally, Section 5, the ultimate exile.
Now, this unexpected public adoration caused absolute panic within the British government. They were terrified that Napoleon might use the courts to somehow avoid punishment if he ever physically touched British soil. So in response, the Admiralty enacted a swift, definitive three-step plan. Step 1. Napoleon was absolutely forbidden from ever disembarking. Step 2. He was transferred directly from the Bellerophon out at sea to another warship, the HMS Northumberland. And Step 3. Immediate banishment.
And that banishment definitely wasn't to a comfortable country estate. It was to Saint Helena. This was quite literally the most isolated piece of rock the British Empire controlled, sitting way out in the middle of the vast South Atlantic Ocean. I want you to really internalize the stark reality of this claustrophobic final destination. It was thousands of miles away from any dream of an enlightened American retirement. It was, for all intents and purposes, a prison made entirely of ocean. Ultimately, the core takeaway from this explainer is a profound shift in power. The man who had marched colossal armies across the vast continents of Europe was finally defeated, not just by opposing soldiers on a battlefield, but by the relentless, suffocating, unbreakable grip of sea power. The Royal Navy didn't just defeat his navy, you guys, they completely erased his geography. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. We so often measure military greatness by land conquered, right? By sweeping cavalry charges and massive artillery barrages. But if land power is what it takes to conquer continents, is an unbreakable blockade at sea the ultimate cage? Just think about how maritime strategy completely neutralized the greatest general of his age without firing a single shot in that final encounter. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible slice of history, and keep questioning how the unseen forces, like a wooden wall of ships, shape our world.